I've got this pair of pliers with the jaws modified to help me get pins like this off with these shutters. Now that would have been driven in from one end. That end's quite mutilated, that certainly didn't go in. Where are we? Cocked. Let's release that. If I can get it out. I want to drive the pin this way. If I can. That's it. Alright, I'm going to be careful not to lose that pin. It was just a straight pin. It's got a little knurl raised up in the middle of it to help it stick and stay in place. I will file off those lumps and bumps before I put it back, because otherwise it's just going to be a nuisance to me. You don't want to have to fight with things like that. In its original state, it would have been easy enough to push that out in either direction. The way that that had been put in, and because the end of it was a bit mutilated, I had to push it back in towards, which was basically pushing back towards the centre a bit. That was not convenient. Right, so here's our shutter blades off. The case is split. The mechanism plate here has our shutter blades and all the other stuff on it. This here is the diaphragm mechanism. That cover plate is held down with 2 screws. There's a return spring here which acts to close the diaphragm. It's a bit sticky in its action. Will certainly benefit from cleaning. So that spring, I want to remove that. Where's my better tweezers? See if I can lift that off over that post with a bit of luck. Yep. The other end probably hooks through there. That's a bit more awkward to get at. That's it. Put that spring to one side. That's a very fine spring. I don't want to damage or lose that. I think I would. I've probably got spares, but I'll have to hunt through boxes and see what I've got. So, at the back here anyway, let me work out where things are. When I reassemble the diaphragm, I'll reassemble it in that position with the blades wide open. So I'm going to make a little mark on the plate here next to that tab so that I know that that's where the position I want that everything to be when that the blades are fully open. And you're not doing any harm making a mark at an area like that. That is well outside anything that's even vaguely in the light path. And I'm going to put a little mark down here too while I'm at it. And then I'll be able to get all the plates and things aligned correctly. So 2 screws hold this in place. The retainer plate. Right, flip that over. There we have it. The diaphragm components are out of the case. The only thing left in the case at this point is our lever. Is that sitting in a recess? It might lift out. Let's find out. There's a post there, it's just sitting on it, I think. I can see a rivet, but I don't know whether it's riveted on or whether it's just sitting on there. If I look closely at that rivet, I'll probably get a better idea. Yeah, it was just sitting on there. Okay, that's good. Pop that to one side. Here's our case. The case will need to be cleaned and the lens will need to be cleaned. I'm going to clean that lens in the case. I'll assemble the shutter around it. When we come to the mechanism plate, that's got the central element in that, the central lens element, and likewise that's held in with a retainer with no notches. I don't need to go to the trouble of fighting to get that thing out. It's much easier to clean this lens in place on the mechanism plate and then assemble the shutter around it than it is to try and remove that lens and fit it back later. I can tell you that from experience. Often the central element is cemented into place, and when you're trying to encourage it to come out of the hole, it can do unfortunate things like get minor chips around the edges or just break in half. But either way, it's a nuisance and you can do without it. So I generally just clean them in place and just be very careful how I go about reassembling the shutter so that I don't put any greasy marks on them in the reassembly process. So there's our mechanism plate with the shutter blades on it. Now the blades normally have the layout of the blades normally has a start position and a finish position. They're all laid one on top of the other. So there is a first blade and a last blade. And the first blade in this case is here. I'm going to make a little mark there next to that. The second blade was here. The third blade was over here. By this stage marks are getting redundant. If we've got the first and the second position marked, the rest fall into place. Is that right? No, that's not the second, is it? That's the fifth. Egypt. Here's the second. Right, first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Fifth blade, of course, just sits on the top. All the others are on top of the blade in front of them at the one end of the queue. Just lift these blades off carefully. The blades are probably identical. Sometimes with shutters you'll find that you get an odd shaped blade. Typically it's because there's something passing through the shutter that needs a bit of extra clearance at one point, like a connection for a rangefinder or something like that. That's okay. I'll just cock this shutter and the blade actuating ring, which is this piece. This is the piece that shuttles backwards and forwards and swings the blades in, out and back in. There are 5 screws. Now the 5 screw heads form the pivot points for the shutter blades, and the washer underneath them effectively holds the blade actuating ring down, stops it floating away in space. Now sometimes you'll find odd size washers here. You may find 2 different sizes of washers. Generally there's no special reason for there to be 2 so different sizes of washers. Occasionally you may find something where that would cause a problem. If you have a look, you might see that some component was too close and needed a narrower washer, because otherwise it would be fouling something else. These components are all in good order. I'm not seeing any corrosion problems. Here's our blade actuating ring. It's a bit dirty. That's dried grease. Most of that's graphite grease. It's probably doing a job quite well. There's oil staining around here. Now the blade, the mechanism plate here, most frequently there's nothing required with these levers. Occasionally, if it's dust or there's a hint of corrosion or dust or something of that nature that's got in there, sometimes the levers don't swing smoothly. You can take all this apart. Take great note of where the springs are, where they sit, what they hook around. There's multiple springs in here, multiple small levers. And I can tell you from experience that it can be a trial getting them all back again if you haven't taken lots of pictures or made nice diagrams of where everything goes before you disassemble things. Looking at the state of this, I'm not expecting any trouble. The mechanism plate's fairly dirty and oily, and I'll have to clean that. But the shutter now in front of me is fairly well stripped down. Let's have a look at this diaphragm mechanism. Now typically with the diaphragm mechanism, the arm is going to be poking out the back so that you can change the settings. In this case it's poking onto the inside. This is also interesting, it's got these standoffs on it. Our blades. 5 diaphragm blades. You can see they're an interesting wiggly shape. Diaphragm blades are interesting because unlike shutter blades, diaphragm blades are interleaved. Each blade goes over the next blade at one end and under the next blade at the other end. So there's no first and last blade, each blade is equal. These components now I've got to clean. Just looking at this ring, this is the film speed setting ring. And it changes what in relation to something else. It changes the position of this pin in relation to here, which would change the setting, the effective setting of the aperture and shutter speed settings. And this exciting piece here with our depth of field pointers. Okay, I'll start cleaning this stuff up. And the case is really the chassis upon which everything is built. So I'll start with the case, clean the case carefully with naphtha, clean the glass carefully with glass cleaner. Now make sure I clean the case inside and out, make sure that's nice and clean. And then start reassembling. Reassemble all the diaphragm mechanism into there, get that all working again, and then start work on the mechanism plate. And I'll start the cleanup process with the shutter case, and I'm using some naphtha here, cigarette lighter fluid, on a cotton bud, and I'll swab all the surfaces inside and out with the exception of the glass. I'll clean that with glass cleaner. And here I'm mostly interested in making sure I remove any traces of old oil or grease. The problem with oil is that over time the volatile components tend to vaporise and then condense on some other handy surface, which is frequently one that you would rather they didn't condense on, like the glass lens or the shutter blades or the diaphragm blades. The outside of the case in particular, of course, being fairly open to the world, tends to gather up dust and stuff like that. You can see I've been around this once or twice, but the cotton buds or Q-tips are still coming off with dirt on them. That seems quite good. I'm going to clean the lens at this stage with some glass cleaner while I've got the opportunity. And here I'm just using normal domestic glass cleaner, window cleaner. You can see the amount of filth that's coming off there. That's pretty dirty. Particularly with the first pass, be very gentle, don't apply a lot of pressure to that glass. You don't want to grind in any particles of grit. Mostly interested in lifting off any particles of grit or dust or anything else that's on there. Once you have any loose stuff off the glass, and you can be a little bit more enthusiastic attempting to get rid of any smears or greasy spots or other annoyances. The inside surface of this rear lens element is certainly in better condition than the outside surface, the one facing the film. There's a bit of spotting here on the coating. Now, it doesn't look pretty to look at. It probably have minimal effect on the quality of the images. Those spots are not going to come out, they are just localised deterioration of the coating. And that would just be from atmospheric contamination, I would imagine. I mean, some glass just deteriorates over time anyway. None of that's particularly bothersome and certainly not unexpected. Right, so I've got my case clean, I've got the glass clean, and that part I can put aside for a moment. I'll clean up these other diaphragm components now. I'll start here with the retainer plate. The retainer plate just needs to be cleaned with a bit of naphtha. Both faces. You can instantly see the colour of this, it's gone yellowy coloured. That's probably from oil. There may be a hint of corrosion in amongst that, but that is most likely old oil that I'm seeing there. both faces need to be cleaned. One face goes towards our diaphragm blades, the other face faces the shutter blades. Yeah, that's very dirty. Normally the diaphragm blades in a simple viewfinder camera like this are connected directly to the aperture setting ring, and so a little bit of stiffness is neither here nor there generally. In this case we're relying on a fine spring to close the aperture down to the set aperture, and so the blades need to move freely and smoothly so that it does in fact track the action of the cam and does close down to the set value correctly. There's a bit of surface pitting there. It's generalised, it's on both faces of that plate. What is that plate? Is that steel? No, it's not. That's non-ferrous, so it's copper alloy, brass or bronze or something. Right, pop that to one side. Means I could polish that out if I wanted to. If I was desperate to make that extra smooth, I could polish that with a bit of brass, so expect to have a good effect. This is the moving component that swings across to close the diaphragm blades down. This is much cleaner. There's very little coming off on this component. And then we have this little lever which acts on that ring to swing it in or outwards. I'm just making sure that that's free from contaminants. There's not much to that, and it's not likely to cause us a problem. Then we have our diaphragm blades. Now the blades are, as you can see, they're a bit of a funny shape. The diaphragm blades you need to be careful when you're cleaning them because they have little rivets on them to form the pivot points, and you can easily catch your cleaning Q-tip or cotton bud either on the tip of the blade or on one of those rivets and damage it while you're cleaning the blade. Now that blade wasn't bad, there's a bit of oil staining on it and that's coming off quite well. Don't press down hard on the blades. You see me manoeuvring these around with my tweezers, but I've had a lot of practice and I know exactly how much pressure I can apply on things, and I'm watching the blade the entire time. So if I was putting too much pressure on there, I would see the blade distort and I would realise my mistake. Shutter blades are much easier to clean by comparison because they, generally speaking, are dead flat, have no rivets on them. Put them down on the surface and you can polish away on them to your heart's content, and that they are typically not so easily damaged as diaphragm blades because they're not such a funny spindly shape. These blades are in good condition, they don't need extra care apart from cleaning. Sometimes you might strike diaphragm blades or shutter blades that have got corrosion problems. You can generally polish the blade out with a bit of brasso or other metal polish, but you have to be very careful not to catch your cleaning cloth or your Q-tip or whatever you're using on the blade at the time. If you get too vigorous and the Q-tip catches the end of a blade like that, and it lifts up as you come back, you can end up with a bend in the blade. And these are some springy, probably high carbon steel, and once they've got a bend in them, it's exceptionally difficult to get that bend back out. Okay, well that's our blades all cleaned, and I can see about reassembling the diaphragm from there, but I'm just thinking how I'm going to achieve this. This is going to be a bit tricky because I've got that lens in the back there, and that would certainly get in the way of my normal jig. So it might be fun. Oh, well, I'll get it done.